Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's RCSLT webinar, Giving Voice, Local Heroes Make National Champions, Engaging with MPs. Now that the general election is out of the way and we're at the beginning of a new 5-year UK government term, we thought it was a good time to refresh and remind people of what we've been up to in the political world and also how you can get involved and engaged in it. You'll be hearing today from me. My name's Derek. I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs here at RCSLT, from Peter Just, who works for the RCSLT as Public Affairs Advisor, particularly on liaison with MPs and Lords at Westminster. You'll be hearing from Julianne Carr. She's an SLT in Leeds, and she's been involved with the Giving Voice campaign right from when it began in 2010. You'll be hearing from Rachel Clare, a postgrad student at UCL, about the work that she and others have done in the recent general election. And from Janet Cooper, the programme manager at Stoke Speaks Out, about the work they've done involving politicians in the local influencing they've done to promote and to defend their service. Housekeeping, you can send in chat messages. You should all have a screen up in front of you. If you look on the right-hand side, there's a thing called chat. You can send in messages to all of us at any time if you'd like to use that chat button. You can also use it to send in questions by using the Q&A button. Just to say, the event is being recorded. There's a web address there, and you'll be able to watch and listen back to this later. Now, a member of RCSLT staff called Digna is able to help. Actually, for reasons that you don't need to worry about, she's in the list as Victoria Harris. So if you've got any problems, you can't hear the sound, the screen's frozen, you don't know how to use one of the functions, send a wee message to Victoria Harris, and she will be able to help you out. The webinar is 45 minutes long. We'll be ending no later than 1:45. The aims of today, which I think you've all seen, are that after the end of the webinar, we hope you'll be familiar with what RCSLT has done and is doing to influence parliamentarians at UK level. We hope you'll have gained an understanding of why influencing is important and an enthusiasm for it. You'll have heard some best practice examples of how it's done, and you'll be familiar with how RCSLT can help you to support you to influence your MPs. If you want to tweet while you're at it, the hashtag for today's webinar is #post-election. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker today, Public Affairs Advisor of RCSLT, Peter Just.
Thank you, Derek, and hello everyone. I'm going to look at engaging with and influencing Westminster, why it matters and what we're doing. But to start off with, I just want to issue one proviso. Today we're looking at Westminster, but naturally we are very conscious of devolution, and just to let you all know that our colleagues in the other nations will be working very hard before the devolved elections next year to influence the local candidates and local politicians. And with that proviso, I want to begin with this pretty picture of the Palace of Westminster and with this question: why is it important to engage with and to try to influence those who work within this building? Well, there are a number of reasons, and here are just three of them. Firstly, MPs and Lords can give voice nationally to service users and promote their interests through parliamentary questions, through speeches, through legislation, and in correspondence and conversations with ministers. Secondly, MPs and Lords can act as UK decision influencers. They have a special ability to engage with and influence national level decision makers. And thirdly, MPs and Lords can raise national issues, securing national policy concessions and national policy changes. So, for example, speech and language therapy is enshrined in statute as an education provision, thanks very largely to a parliamentary campaign during the passage of the Children and Families Act. If that's why it's important to engage with Westminster, by doing so, what are we trying to achieve? Well, we're trying to achieve some general things. Firstly, increased understanding of how speech and language therapy transforms lives. Secondly, increased influence for RCSLT, so it is seen as a go-to organisation by all relevant UK policymakers. And our fundamental general goal is to secure improved lives for those with communication and swallowing needs. However, we are also trying to achieve some specific things, and these are based on the manifesto asks we pursued before the election, either as part of the Allied Health Professions Federation or in partnership with the Communication Trust. And the first thing we're trying to secure is to build on the big win we had in the Conservative Party manifesto, which talked about changing the narrative from doctors and nurses to include the whole health workforce. And this means we'll be pursuing with the government their manifesto pledge to ensure that there are enough doctors, nurses and other staff to meet patient needs. We'll also continue to pursue some of our other manifesto asks. These are mainly in relation to children and young people, some of which are reflected in the Labour and Liberal Democrat manifestos. And as part of that, we will continue to pursue a mid-parliament review of the SEND reforms. So if that's what we want to achieve, how are we going about doing it? Well, we're doing some things right here, right now. The first of which is engaging with the new UK government, the top right, Jeremy Hunt, the Continuing Health Secretary, top middle, Edward Timpson, the Minister for Children and Families, and top right, Robert Buckland, the Solicitor General. He's been a good friend to RCSLT over the years, and in fact won a Giving Voice award, and we very much look forward to meeting him in September to talk about our justice work. We're also engaging with the opposition parties at Westminster. Bottom left, the SNP health spokesperson, Dr. Philippa Whitford. Bottom middle, Steve McCabe, one of Labour's junior education spokespeople who we met before the election. And bottom right, Lord Story, the Lib Dems principal spokesperson on education, who was very supportive during the passage of the Children and Families Act. The second thing we're doing is writing to all MPs and Lords with a briefing note. You can see a copy of it here on the right. This includes tips about how they can care for and project their voices, how they can communicate better with those who have communication needs, as well as more general information about how speech and language therapy transforms people's lives. And the third thing we're doing right here and right now is continuing to provide the Secretariat for the All-Party Group on Speech and Language Difficulties. This represents a cross-party forum in which it is possible to talk about speech and language therapy issues and issues affecting service users. The group has recently had its AGM, and here are its new officers. On the top left, Lord Ramsbottom, the crossbench peer. The top right, Labour MP Geraint Davis. Bottom left, the Conservative MP Paul Maynard. Bottom right, the Labour MP Kevin Barron. We're currently working with the group on a programme of work for the forthcoming year, and the next meeting will be in October on the Youth Justice Estate. But we're not just doing things right here, right now. We've got a 5-year plan to take us from here right through to the 2020 UK general election. This involves a number of things. Firstly, a rolling programme of engagement with ministers and opposition spokespeople, engaging with key individuals and groups, having where appropriate parliamentary events, including our children's jokes competition, Voice Box, and we'll send a series of briefings both proactively and reactively to MPs and peers about various aspects of work ahead of parliamentary debates and for select committee enquiries. So that's the national picture. But equally important is the local one. Why is that so? Two main reasons. Firstly, it is our members who can most powerfully demonstrate to an MP how speech and language therapy transforms people's lives. It's what you and what they do every day for an MP's constituent. And secondly, as decisions are made ever more at a local level, local influencing and local engagement becomes ever more important. There are three main reasons for this. Firstly, MPs can give voice locally to service users and promote their interests. So, for instance, we've recently met with an MP who wanted to talk to us about how she might put pressure on her CCG to improve provision in her constituency. MPs can also act as local decision influencers, just as at the national level. Also at the local level, they have a special ability to engage with and influence local decision makers on health, education and social care. They can also raise local issues both nationally and locally. You'll hear later about some MPs writing to their party spokespeople on the back of contact from members. And similarly, we know of MPs in England who have written to their local authorities about service provision on the back of contact from members. So how can we support you to do this ever more important engagement? Well, today, the RCSLT UK Policy and Public Affairs team makes you this pledge. We will provide you with resources. The photograph here shows you some of the fact sheets we've produced to help you make the case. They're all available and downloadable from the RCSLT website. We'll also give you advice, including on an MP's interests and backgrounds, how best to approach them, and how best to make your case. And finally, we'll share best practice of local political engagement with you. And that's a really good place for me to stop because my colleagues here will talk about that with much greater eloquence than I could. So thank you all very much. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Julie.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Julie and I'm a speech and language therapist currently working in Leeds. And as Derek previously mentioned, I've been involved in Giving Voice since the campaign began when I was a final year student at Newcastle University. I first got involved when RCSLT came to Newcastle University to tell us about Giving Voice, and was very enthusiastic presentation and really sparked my enthusiasm to get involved. So a few months later, I attended the Giving Voice Champions training, and part of this training, RCSLT recommended that and to encourage us to write to our MPs. That's what I did. I used a template letter to write to Ian Lavery, who is the MP for Wansbeck in North East England, because I thought it was really important to get involved with campaigning at this level. Following the letter that I wrote to Mr. Lavery, he invited me into his constituency to talk about speech and language therapy. And at this meeting, I took the Matrix evidence report and prior to that, I'd spoken to RCSLT and they'd recommended sort of pulling out the relevant information that would be most relevant to my MP. And I also took a Giving Voice leaflet and a pen, and so that I could leave him with something. And he recorded a short video message of his support for the campaign, which then went onto the RCSLT website. Also at this meeting with Mr. Lavery, I told him about the mass mobilisation event that was happening in October later in the year, and said that I'll be writing to him in due course to arrange that. And I also told him about a stall I was holding at a local street fair to raise awareness of speech and language therapy, which was later that month, and said that I would also be great if he could attend that. So I followed up the meeting with a letter summarising what we talked about and thanked him for his support, and reminded him about the event at the street fair, which he did come along and attend and showed his support. And we got a photograph which made it into the local newspaper, which helped to spread that message a little bit further. And I also wrote to him, as I mentioned, to meet at mass mobilisation in London. So I went down to London as part of the RCSLT event with lots of other speech and language therapists, and met Mr. Lavery in the Houses of Parliament. Prior to the meeting, RCSLT had a rally and sort of got us all enthusiastic and engaged, and told us what the messages that we should be taking to our MPs. So I felt very prepared to go back in and meet him again. So RCSLT were really supportive on the day, and as I said, I met him in the Houses of Parliament. And that evening I attended the Giving Voice Awards ceremony, and there was another North East MP sitting on the same table as me, Sharon Hodgson, and she went and voted in Parliament during the ceremony. And when she came back, she said she'd actually had a conversation with Mr. Lavery about speech and language therapy, and that he'd met me that day. So that was really positive. That showed that they were talking about the event that had happened in Parliament. The following summer, I saw in the local newspaper that Mr. Lavery was going to be speaking at an event at a local football club with some of their MPs as well. So I went along with one of my friends to listen to them speak, and I took a Giving Voice leaflet and wore my Giving Voice badge. And he talked passionately about the local area and the NHS and the Health and Social Care Bill. And at the end, I went over and said hello and reminded him about the importance of speech and language therapy, and gave him another Giving Voice leaflet and another pen, which I was really pleased with because he said his previous one had run out of ink. So that was really positive, just to remind him that speech and language therapy was still important and to keep it in his mind. I noticed that he had recently just got Twitter, so at this point I also said if I tweeted anything, would he show support via that? And he said that he would also be supportive on Twitter, which was great. And then the following year there was a RCSLT photography competition for a Giving Voice calendar, and I entered some photos into this competition, and 2 of the photos successfully made it into the calendar, and they were both in the North East, and one of them was of me holding a speech bubble next to a statue at Ellington Colliery, which is part of Mr. Lavery's constituency in Wansbeck. So I wrote to him saying that I had won this competition and I would really like to present him with a calendar to say thank you, and he was delighted and he met up with me, so I got to remind him again about the importance of speech and language therapy, and he was really pleased that the North East had made it onto the calendar as well, and said he would take it back to Westminster, and said that he would tell his colleagues in Westminster that the minor statue was modelled on a young version of him because he used to work at Ellington Colliery before he was an MP. And the photograph that you see here also, I sent that to a local newspaper as well, and that also got printed, so that was a couple of years after the initial involvement, but it was still in local newspaper, still spreading the message that bit further. And in the meantime, I've written to him a number of times about speech and language therapy, and I wrote to him when the all-party parliamentary group did an inquiry report on speech and language difficulties, and he requested a hard copy of that report, which RCSLT then sent on to him. So RCSLT have been really supportive throughout my involvement with my MP, and I've always been able to ask for advice and support, and he's all able to follow things up. And I feel like I've got good open communication with him, and I feel like he does sort of know who I am now if I do see him again. And it just reminds him that speech and language therapy is really important. There's been lots of small meetings that have built up to a bigger thing. And I'm passionate about speech and language therapy, and I think he was able to see that through the meetings as well. So I think he's become passionate about it too. I'm currently working in Leeds, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to engage with MPs while I'm working in Yorkshire as well. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Rachel.
So my name's Rachel Clare, and I'm representing UCL Giving Voice Society. I'm going to discuss the Great Letter Writing Challenge. So with the general election approaching in May 2015, UCL's Giving Voice Society ran the Great Letter Writing Challenge in October 2014. The event involved members writing to their MPs to ask the political parties to support the early identification of speech, language and communication needs, and to provide equal access to speech and language therapy for children with SLCN. We also asked for the importance of allied health professionals to be acknowledged in policies, speeches and documents. This event occurred during a lunchtime, and it involved us copying a letter template, which was provided by the RCSLT. This letter template was also uploaded onto our Facebook page so that members could participate if they were unable to attend the event. Approximately 40 members took part in the campaign, and we sent letters to MPs across England, Scotland and Wales. So why do we contact our MPs? So we wish to raise awareness of speech and language therapy before the general election, including that we believe that the early identification of SLCN is important. We also ask for the importance of allied health professionals to be recognised, and we wish not only to be recognised by being referenced in policies and speeches by the political parties, but also by senior director posts being open to allied health professionals, and ensuring that allied health professionals were represented on health and wellbeing boards. How did the RCSLT support this campaign? So when organising the campaign, members of the committee contacted Peter Just, who provided the letter template. This ensured that what we were asking of the MPs matched with the work of the RCSLT, so that we're all working towards the same goals. This also ensured smooth running of the letter writing event, as it meant that society members only had to bring the name and address of the MP, and then they could copy the letter template, making it an efficient event. The RCSLT also gave us permission to use the logos in our letters, so this made our letters look professional, and it also increased MPs' exposure to our logos, hopefully aiding recognition when they expose them again in the future. So what did we achieve with this campaign? We received 9 replies from our MPs, and these responses contain many positive, supportive comments. We're really happy with this response rate. It's almost 25%, which is really great from MPs. What was also amazing was that 4 of our letters were forwarded on to other members of the political parties. This included Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary of State for Health, Andy Burnham, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, and Dan Poulter, who was the Minister responsible for allied health professionals. This means that our letters to backbench MPs were shared with frontbench MPs, and so our message spread through the parties. So our message was being spread beyond the MPs who we initially contacted. So we really hope that this campaign helped raise awareness of the importance of speech and language therapy and allied health professionals to the political parties during the run-up to the general election. It is difficult to measure the impact of our campaign beyond counting our responses from MPs. However, as Peter just mentioned, the political parties did make reference to speech and language therapy and allied health professionals in speeches. So we really hope that our letters help contribute towards this by increasing exposure to the messages of the RCSLT. So what are our future plans? Our newly elected committee will be running a further Great Letter Writing Challenge at the end of September 2015. This campaign will focus on raising MPs' awareness of the role of speech and language therapy with individuals with dementia, with youth offenders, and also at the impact of SLCN on mental health. At the event, society members will be given a presentation about our role with each of these 3 areas, and then members will choose one area that they feel really passionately about to write to their MP. So the aim of this campaign is to continue our correspondence with MPs and to raise awareness of our involvement in different client groups, demonstrating the breadth of our role. So this builds on from the current event that we recently did, because that was focusing on highlighting on the role of our role with paediatrics. Keep an eye out for future campaigns run by UCL's Giving Voice Society. And now I'm going to hand over to Janet.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi everyone, I'm Janet Cooper. I'm a speech and language therapy team leader for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Partnership Trust, and I'm also the programme manager for our preventive and early intervention strategy for Stoke-on-Trent called Stoke Speaks Out. I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about how we engaged with our local MPs to shape the local decision making to prepare the future. If I just share with you the current context in Stoke. Stoke Speaks Out has been going for 11 years, and we've had lots of really outstanding practice and some really, really excellent outcomes. In 2010, we had significant funding cuts, and I know those were across the country. And they didn't just hit our service, but actually hit lots of children's services. And despite that, the speech and language therapy prevalence study that we conduct every 3 years showed us that we've got increasing amounts of children in need of speech, language and communication support. The Royal College came at a really good time for us in terms of recognising our good practice and wanting to help us engage with our MPs to support a local campaign. So what did we do? We held a strategic roundtable event that was chaired by a local MP. She actually funded the venue in her constituency, and Royal College actually hosted the event. We didn't go for a conference because actually we've got some really good practitioners in Stoke-on-Trent who turn up for everything, but they've not always got the funding and they're not always able to make those decisions high up. So what we did is had a closed event for around 30 people who were local decision makers and strategic stakeholders. During the event, we dwelt on the good practice, and often we forget that in austere times, don't we? We didn't dwell on the cuts and we didn't dwell on funding. We talked about the things we've done that have gone really well. We also discussed how the local work could be sustained in its current form, and then debated how we could use what we've learned to influence national policy and priorities. The reason we did it was actually, we do forget that we've got lots of things on our own doorsteps that are really excellent, and that goes for lots of areas across the country. We wanted to celebrate the achievements that we'd already had, but we also wanted to make sure that local partners and MPs were aware of that impact. Over the last 11 years, we've seen lots of different councils, partners, strategic decision makers and MPs come and go. And actually, each time somebody new comes, you need to make sure that they know the information. We also wanted them to know the impact of the programme and the effect that the local cuts had had. So we did sneak it in, but it wasn't the highlight of the invitation. We wanted to make sure that those partners were engaged in decision making for the future and make sure that speech, language and communication was on everybody's agenda. College were absolutely supportive. They were the ones who had the idea, and the time was perfect for us. We just were in receipt of our latest prevalence study that had shown us that our incidence of speech and language had actually increased, despite services still not growing or actually indeed being cut. They liaised and opened the doors to local MPs, one particular MP in the north, Joan Wally, and got speech, language and communication onto her agenda. And so jointly they organised the event. College sent out all the invitations, the same as with the other examples. The logo was on there, they were very professional. The agenda was delivered by Royal College, and they made sure the day ran absolutely smoothly. They also liaised with the media, which is something that's hard to do when you're local. They haven't got the same restrictions that perhaps people working for the NHS and local councils have. College also followed the event with further media coverage and corresponded with MPs nationally. We felt it achieved a lot, not least the networking opportunities it gave us. So the chair of the City Council at the time didn't know an awful lot about Stoke Speaks Out, and we asked him to open the event. So by doing that, he had to know a lot more about what we did, and was asked for a briefing, and we sent him lots and lots of information. It also opened further doors with our local MP, who we'd perhaps engaged with in the past, but not more recently. And she was about to leave Parliament at the end. She was at the end of her term of office and made this her swan song. She's absolutely determined that her work will carry on. It put speech, language and communication back on the agenda of some people who've perhaps been involved in the early stages of Stoke Speaks Out, but moved on to other things. And it gave us opportunity to share what our current concerns were, the instance of speech and language difficulties, which is around 46% delay currently in Stoke, and to show them the links with other aspects like youth offending. It gave us media coverage, which was well needed, and it's absolutely led to future funding. Following the event, we've actually had further forums and discussions with a number of the people on the panel. This has led to a school readiness plan for the city, which is a 2-year plan, which is going to have huge investment. And that's coming from a number of sources. Public health are investing, the schools funding are investing, both from the early years and the schools block. We continue to make links with MPs. I think personally what it's done for me has reminded me how important that link is. We've currently got a new MP, which again, college have already opened the doors there. They've been out to visit with her, and she's already invited me to meet with her in August. And it's reminded me to meet with the MPs I've already got relationships with. We always invite an MP to one of our big events. So we had a conference last week, and Tristram Hunt came and spoke at that event. He opened up the floor to questions and he presented an award to one of our practitioners. And we're going to continue to build on those networks to make sure that we have continued success. As part of the conference, we put to the delegates to discuss what they would like MPs to know. And we've collated that into a document now that we're going to circulate to all our local MPs and to Royal College. So I'm going to hand back over to Derek, who's going to give you opportunity for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our presenters. If you're online and you would like to send in a question, please do so using the wee Q&A tab on the right. But in the meanwhile, we had some questions submitted in advance, so I shall kick off with those. The first one is, how do we raise the profile of such a broad profession as SLT amongst politicians and the wider public? And then it says, do you think there's a greater role for involvement from trade unions and think tanks in this? Peter, would you like to kick us off on this?
Okay, certainly. We raise the profile of our profession by engaging as much as we possibly can with as many relevant bodies as we possibly can, and I'll just run through some of those with you in a moment. But firstly, on trade unions, absolutely. Derek, who you've just heard from, has a really fantastic and close relationship with our colleagues in Unite. On think tanks, the Policy and Public Affairs team over the summer is going to look at a systematic programme of engagement with some of the most important ones, building on existing relationships where we have them, for example, with the Centre for Social Justice. But more generally, what the Policy and Public Affairs team is doing is working on a programme of engaging with external organisations. So, for instance, we've all in the Policy and Public Affairs team just met with the Local Government Association, me with their Public Affairs team, my policy colleague who covers children and young people with the relevant contacts on those issues at the LGA, and similarly our adult policy person has done the same. We're also working with a range of condition-specific charities and organisations, for example, the Motor Neurone Disease Society, Association, Macmillan, Parkinson's, the Alzheimer's Society and the Stroke Association. And on the political front, we'll be working with as many relevant other all-party parliamentary groups as we can. And finally, we're working with Save the Children on their Read On Get On campaign to sort of promote speech and language therapy as part of that campaign.
Thank you very much, Peter. Janice, have you got anything to add?
Yes, I think from a local perspective, everybody needs to understand the role of speech and language therapy and the links that has to all sorts of things, educational attainment, outcomes for children and for families. Our tagline is communication is everybody's business, so we make sure that we get into as many forums as we can locally. By having a good practice example locally, we've also been able to join in some of the national campaigns. So I've been to events for Read On Get On, been able to feed some of our local practice into that debate. I've been to a number of things for the Communication Trust, and we spoke in Parliament for the all-party parliamentary group on the links between disadvantage and speech and language. So it's absolutely crucial everybody understands speech and language therapy is something that's important, but also speech and language in general is everybody's business.
Thank you. Julie, have you got anything?
Yeah, in terms of when I was meeting with my MP, that was just as a constituent. I wasn't part of the service, so I just wrote to my MP because I was passionate about speech and language therapy. But it was about thinking if there's any areas that he might be specifically interested in, and sort of starting off by talking about those. And he was very interested in some of the information sort of from the Matrix evidence report. And then once you've hooked them on that basic information that kind of goes with their interest, you can then drop in sort of other things that speech and language therapists do in other areas that they work in. There's been quite a lot of awareness raised with the wider public as well, and it's always very interesting to spread that message further, because often people don't know what speech and language therapy is unless they've had to access it. I think it's important to get that message out.
Thank you. The next question we've got says, I'm interested in how we combine political influencing with our professional roles. The person says, I'm in a politically restricted post in a local authority and worry about doing the wrong thing. I'll take that one. I'll kick off. Interesting. Political restriction is something that's often misunderstood. Unless your contract says otherwise, political restriction means that you can't hold office in a political party above a certain level, and that you can't be publicly associated with a political party. Aside from that, you're free to campaign and raise awareness and express your views like anybody else. But it certainly is the case that you need to think when you're campaigning and influencing, am I doing this as a private individual citizen, in which case I can do and say what I want, or am I doing this as a speech and language therapist employed by an NHS trust or whoever it might be, in which case, of course, in that capacity, I need to be careful to inform my manager in communications and do whatever else I need to do in my employed role. Peter, have you got anything to add on that?
If I may add just something. Firstly, I think you need to look at two aspects here. There's the aspect of, for example, inviting an MP to come and look at the local service and all the fantastic and wonderful work it does, as Janet said, about celebrating what actually you are achieving every day in your job for MPs' constituents. That's almost like the good news story. I think there's a difference between that and trying to engage with an MP when perhaps you don't have news that's as good, or talking about cuts, etc. I think those sort of things you would probably need to be quite careful about before you approach an MP, and certainly have internal discussions with your manager at the very least.
Thank you. Rachel, I think you had a query to raise.
Yes, I wanted to ask about how to engage with MPs, because I've been emailing my MP trying to set up a meeting, and I haven't had any response. I'm not sure what the next step is, because I thought he was really engaged, because he wrote back to me and he seemed really passionate about speech and language therapy. So I'm not sure what to do now.
And that's a very good question. It can sometimes seem when you're contacting elected politicians like you're writing or tweeting into the void, and they're all different is the short answer. Some of them do their own Twitter accounts, some of them answer their own emails, some of them employ staff and never do. I think that my tip would be, if you're trying to get a local meeting in the constituency, the fail-safe is the constituency office and the telephone, because actually there'll be somebody in their local constituency office who controls their diary when they're back home in the constituency, and they're the person who can shortcut you through to a meeting or to the surgery. Any constituent is free to turn up at a surgery, but it's often helpful if you can say in advance, I'm coming in and this is what I'd like to talk about, and the constituency office can often help cut you through to that. Okay, Peter, there was something else I was wanting to just ask you. I mean, is there more to local influencing than just MP engagement? And what are RCSLT going to help people with that wider local influencing?
The answer to the question is absolutely yes. MP engagement is only one part of, important though it is only one part of local influencing. Going ahead, one thing that we're going to be looking at in the Policy and Public Affairs team is how we can support a broader programme of local engagement for members, and I would hope we'll be talking to members about that in terms of resources we might be able to provide and templates, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That is amazingly and unusually all of the questions we have. So unless anyone else comes in just now, I will draw us to a close. So thank you very much for all of your time today. Thank you for your questions and participation. A reminder that this will be going up online after, so you can view it and listen to it again as much as you wish. And to say thank you to all of our participants. Thank you to you online. Please do, if you've been inspired to get involved in giving voice and influencing, get in touch and we'll help you out. And we look forward to having you on another RCSLT webinar sometime soon. Thank you and good afternoon.